night envelops the desolate forest, where the dense darkness seems to swallow everything. The wind whistles through the ancient trees, creating eerie sounds like the whispers of forgotten souls. The feeble moonlight, obscured by heavy clouds, is just enough to illuminate a group of people clad in black cloaks silently moving. They walk in a long line, each carrying a torch, the dancing flames reflecting on faces hidden beneath hoods. No one speaks, no one stops. They only march, as if guided by an invisible force to this place. A chant rises in the wind, deep and steady, like an ancient curse gradually awakening. In the middle of the clearing, an old wooden coffin lies slumped on a stone pedestal. Its gray, cracked wood seems as though it has existed for centuries. Strange characters are carved on the coffin lid, winding and gloomy, like a language long forgotten. One of the men in black steps forward, his withered hands gently touching the coffin's lid, then slowly opening it. Inside, a young girl lies motionless. She wears a white dress, now smeared with mud and streaked with dried blood. Her eyes are wide open, filled with horror. She wants to scream, to cry out for help, but her mouth has been sewn shut with rough black thread. Her wrists and ankles are tightly bound with iron chains, skin and flesh bleeding. She struggles, tears streaming down, rolling along her pale face. Fear envelops her, like an invisible knife stabbing deep into her heart. A figure detaches from the group of men in black and advances toward the coffin. His face is hidden beneath his hood, with only his thin, veined hands visible as they grip a cold, sharp silver knife. He stops right next to the girl, bends down, and lets the knife's blade touch her palm. The girl trembles violently. Blood flows from the cut, dripping drop by drop onto the cold ground. Her panicked eyes dart around, pleading for mercy, but those around her only regard her with indifferent gazes. A deep-voiced man speaks, his tone echoing as if from hell. "This blood will end a curse, one sealed soul, so that another soul may be free." Suddenly the wind rises fiercely, sweeping away dry leaves and causing the torches to flicker in the darkness. The chanting grows louder and more hurried, as if the entire forest is bearing witness to a horrifying ritual. And then Maxwell Sterling jolts awake. Cold sweat streams down his forehead, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. His breath is heavy and hurried, as if he has just stepped out of a nightmare. He sits motionless for a while, his hand clenching the steering wheel tightly, feeling as if his entire body has been submerged in the darkness of the past. Outside the window, the night rushes by at high speed. The highway stretches endlessly, with only a few scattered lampposts, their pale yellow light glancing off the glossy white paint of the Mercedes S-Class. The surrounding space is eerily silent, save for the engine's low rumble echoing in the night. Maxwell takes a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Yet the scene he just witnessed remains imprinted in his mind. The images are so vivid that he can almost smell the metallic tang of blood, feel the chill of the knife, and see the desperate eyes of the girl in the coffin. This cannot be just a nightmare. Who is that girl? Why did he see that scene? The curse. Is it real? Maxwell shakes his head vigorously, trying to dispel the haunting thoughts. But deep within, he knows clearly he is connected to that ritual. Maxwell Sterling is not a man easily swayed by superstition or haunted by the supernatural. He is a successful businessman, a real estate billionaire, a man whom the entire world respects. For Maxwell, money, power, and control are everything.
The 2-year-old.
But there is one thing even he cannot control: death. Both of his wives died mysteriously. Charlotte Whitman, his first wife, passed away just before her 30th birthday in a car accident. Rebecca Morgan, his second wife, suddenly fell terminally ill just before her 25th birthday. No one understood what had happened, but Maxwell knew. He knew about the curse. A famous fortune teller had warned him many years ago, "You will not live past 50 unless you can sacrifice another soul as a substitute." At first, Maxwell merely laughed it off. He did not believe in such absurdities. But then, the successive deaths occurred. Each time one of his wives died, a white flower would appear on his bed the next morning. Strange whispers echoed in the night, shadows flitted across mirrors, and the sensation of being watched, always, everywhere, haunted him. Maxwell could no longer deny it. The curse is real, and if he does nothing, he will be next. Maxwell knew that to survive, he needed a talisman, a pure girl, one who could become a sacrificial offering to alter his fate. And then he found Emily. In a remote countryside by the Mississippi River, there stood a small, dilapidated house on the verge of collapse. An 8-year-old girl sat huddled by the window, her wide eyes gazing outside, where the gray sky foretold an impending storm. She did not know that her destiny had already been sealed. The white Mercedes quietly parked in front of the house. The car door opened, and then a pair of shiny leather shoes stepped down onto the muddy ground. Maxwell Sterling had arrived.
Hello,
and
everyone.
Emily, that little girl, was about to be swept into a nightmare beyond her wildest imagination. Maxwell Sterling, the man at the pinnacle of power with his multi-billion-dollar real estate empire, is the perfect archetype that many yearn for. Successful, wealthy, and exuding a cold, authoritative presence, he possesses it all. But what no one knows is that behind that glamorous facade, Maxwell is a man haunted by his past and obsessed with a deadly curse. People whisper about him, not for his billion-dollar deals, but because of the unseen darkness that clings to his life. They say that any woman who enters Maxwell Sterling's life will not live long. 15 years ago, Charlotte Whitman, the woman whom Maxwell loved with all his heart, entered his life. Charlotte was not only a wife, but also the sole support during Maxwell's early years venturing into the business world. She was gentle, intelligent, always smiling even when everything was against them. She trusted Maxwell even when he had nothing. They married and began a life that, for Maxwell, was all he ever needed. But then that happiness was cruelly torn asunder. On the eve of Charlotte's 30th birthday, she returned home after a party with friends. Rain poured down on the deserted highway, and the streetlights flickered like watchful eyes. The phone on the seat vibrated, its screen flashing oddly. Charlotte sensed that something was amiss. She tried to remain calm, but her unease grew with every moment. Suddenly, a pair of dazzling headlights burst forth from ahead at a terrifying speed. In a panic, Charlotte slammed on the brakes, but the car did not stop. She screamed, gripping the steering wheel tightly, but only seconds later, a horrific collision sent the car spinning multiple times, crashing directly into the median. A massive explosion tore through the night, and in an instant, Charlotte vanished from this world. News headlines dominated the following morning. Charlotte Whitman, wife of billionaire Maxwell Sterling, perished in a catastrophic accident. Police have yet to determine the cause of the loss of control. Maxwell was paralyzed upon hearing the news. But what truly plunged him into a nightmare was when he awoke the next morning on his empty bed. On his pillow, a white flower had mysteriously appeared, a pure, soft white flower. But to him, it was a symbol of death. No one could explain why it was there, nor could anyone understand the emotion that welled within Maxwell when he saw it. From that day forward, he was no longer an ordinary man. He became a man haunted by an invisible dread. 7 years later, Maxwell remarried Rebecca Morgan, a young, radiant fashion designer who brought a new glimmer of hope into his life. But the nightmare returned once again. Immediately after their wedding, Rebecca began experiencing strange dreams. In those dreams, she saw herself being dragged down an endless pit, cold hands grasping her, and whispers echoing in the darkness. She felt as if someone was always watching her. She began to appear emaciated, with pallid skin and sunken eyes. Doctors could not determine the cause, only stating that she suffered from a mysterious wasting disease. On August 15th, a day before Rebecca's 25th birthday, she lay in a hospital bed with a high fever and weak breathing. Maxwell stood by her bedside, holding her hand tightly, but the terror in his eyes was unmistakable. For he knew that this had happened before, and this time he could do nothing to stop it. Rebecca opened her eyes, looked directly at him, and whispered, "They are coming. I can see them." Only a few hours later, she exhaled her last breath in Maxwell's arms. The next morning, on his bed once more, there was a white flower. After Rebecca's death, the curse of Maxwell Sterling was no longer merely a rumor. It became a terrifying legend among the elite. No one dared to approach him. No woman dared to enter his life. They said he was haunted by an invisible force, that he was being punished for some sin from a previous life. And then a prophecy emerged, passed on by the most powerful figures. He will not reach the age of 50 unless he sacrifices a pure girl to alter his fate. Maxwell wanted to deny it all, but could he? Both of his wives had died just before pivotal milestones in their lives. 2 white flowers appeared mysteriously. Twice, the 2 women he loved most left him under the most horrific circumstances. He had spent his entire life searching for answers, yet the deeper he delved, the more he found himself lost in a labyrinth with no escape. Now, at 48 years old, he had only 2 years left. If the curse were real, then he would be next. To survive, he had to break it before it was too late. And as a man willing to do anything to stay alive, he turned to one final solution. He began researching ancient legends and mysterious sacrificial rituals that had existed for centuries. A mysterious prophet gave him the answer. The sacrifice must be a pure girl, an untainted soul untouched by the world. Only then will the curse be lifted, and you will be free. Maxwell wasn't sure if he truly believed those words, but one thing was certain. If he did nothing, death awaited him. That was when Maxwell found Emily, a poor 8-year-old girl from the outskirts of the Mississippi River. A child with no future, with no other choice. When Maxwell stepped into the dilapidated wooden house of the little girl's family, a cold wind swept through the open door, carrying the breath of destiny. That little girl would be the next victim, or would she be the one to break the curse? The sun gradually retreats behind the trees along the Mississippi River, leaving behind a gloomy and sultry atmosphere of a southern summer afternoon. The still water reflects the last rays of the day, but that beauty cannot mask the harsh reality of the people living in this place. Emily's house stands precariously on a barren piece of land, its old wooden planks patched together haphazardly. The corrugated roof now faded and pocked with rust stains. Inside that house, there is not a single valuable item. Everything is worn out, tarnished by time and the relentless grip of poverty. Emily, the 8-year-old girl with big, clear eyes like the surface of the water, has grown accustomed to this precarious life. She has never known luxury, never been dressed in beautiful gowns like the other children in town. Her clothes are mended in a makeshift way, and the shoes she wears are tattered, used until they can no longer be repaired. Day after day, she helps her mother wash clothes by the river, diligently picking up every nail and scrap of fabric that might fetch a little change. Her family once knew better days. But when her father lost his job at the lumber mill, everything gradually fell into dire straits. Bills, exorbitant loans, and threats from creditors piled up, pushing them into an inescapable situation. Her parents did everything they could to survive and support Emily, but eventually, they came to realize that it would never be enough. And when there was nothing left to bargain with, they were forced to make a decision that no parent ever wishes to face. Then Maxwell Sterling appeared. He arrived on a stifling day when the heat made it hard to breathe. Maxwell's silhouette stretched long along the cracked dirt path in front of Emily's house. The perfect black suit enveloped the man with an icy demeanor. His steps were slow yet assured, as if he already held the victory in his grasp. When Maxwell entered the modest wooden house, he showed no surprise at the poverty that assaulted his eyes. He simply sat down quietly on the wobbly chair, his cold, sharp eyes scanning every corner of the house, evaluating it as if appraising a piece of merchandise. Emily's parents sat opposite him, their eyes revealing unmistakable unease. Yet they said nothing. No one wanted to be the one to speak up. In that suffocating space, Maxwell was the one who broke the silence. In a deep, deliberate tone, each word measured as if carefully chosen, he spoke of a future, a better life for Emily, where the little girl would no longer suffer hunger, where she would go to school and live in a splendid home. Maxwell's words sounded like a beautiful dream, a chance to change fate. But there was one thing he did not mention, the price to pay for all of that. Emily stood huddled behind the old wooden door, her small hands gripping the frame so tightly that they turned white. She did not fully understand what the man was saying, but she clearly understood her parents' eyes. Those were the eyes of people who had made a decision, no matter how painful. She saw her mother's trembling hand clutching a pen, her father's face downcast, not daring to look at her. Then the pen touched the paper. In that single moment, Emily's fate was rewritten. No one asked if she wanted to go. No one told her that this would be the last time she would ever see the home where she had grown up. Only the heavy sigh of her mother, a slow nod from her father, and then Maxwell rose, satisfied with the arrangement he had set in motion. Everything happened too fast. An hour before, Emily had been sitting by the river, drawing aimlessly on the dry ground. Now she was placed in the back seat of a sleek black car, the door closing, severing every tie to her old life. She turned to look through the window. Her parents still stood there, but they said nothing. No farewell, no gesture to hold her back. Emily waited, waiting for a gentle glance, a wave of the hand, some sign that they would remember her, that they still loved her, but they did not turn back. The car rolled away, carrying with it the entirety of Emily's childhood into the unknown ahead. The Sterling mansion appeared like a towering castle amidst the ancient forest, where sunlight could only filter through the dense canopy, leaving faint streaks of light on the stone-paved pathway leading to the enormous iron gate. That gate slowly swung open, heavy and aged as if worn by time, even though it was always maintained in pristine condition. As soon as the car carrying Emily came to a stop in front of the mansion, the little girl's eyes widened, gazing up at the vast building with its cold gray stone walls and lofty arched ceilings reminiscent of ancient European castles. From afar, the glass windows reflected the brilliant red of the sunset, but to Emily, those colors did not evoke warmth. They only made her feel as though she were stepping into a place that did not belong to this world. The car door opened. The driver stepped out and circled to the back to open the door for her. Still sitting silently, the girl clutched her thin hands tightly onto the hem of her dress, her eyes quietly following the man standing on the stone steps. Maxwell Sterling. He said nothing, merely standing there with a composed, cold gaze, as if scrutinizing her every move. Emily swallowed hard, then slowly stepped onto the pavement. Her small shoes touched the marble tiles, producing a sound so faint it nearly vanished within the vast space. The girl felt that this place was unnaturally quiet, a silence that was not normal. There were no birds singing, no rustling leaves in the wind, no sound except for the echo of her own footsteps and Maxwell's on the hard ground. The large door opened, and Emily stepped into a completely different world. Inside the Sterling mansion, everything was magnificently perfect. The walls were intricately carved and coated in a pale cream paint, contrasting with the high ceilings adorned with dazzling crystal chandeliers. A marble spiral staircase wound its way to the second floor, where long corridors stretched out, bathed in soft golden light, cascading onto the red velvet carpets. Oil paintings hung along the hallways, depicting women in lavish gowns from bygone eras. Yet there was something unsettling about them. Those eyes seemed to follow Emily wherever she moved. A middle-aged woman approached, her face expressionless, her hand gently resting on Emily's shoulder. "Come with me," she said in a low but clear voice. Emily glanced back at Maxwell, but he had already turned and walked away, leaving the little girl alone with the stranger. Hesitant for a moment, she reluctantly followed. Along the corridor, the servants passed by without a word. They did not look directly at Emily, nor did they pause to greet her as one might expect for a new family member. They glided past her like shadows, their faces blank, their eyes avoiding hers. Then Emily suddenly realized one thing: no one here looked her in the eye. That realization sent shivers down her spine. Emily's room was located on the second floor, at the very end of a long, dim hallway. The door opened, and before her lay a space more spacious, than any room she had ever known. The room featured a large bed, covered with pristine white sheets, a wide window opening onto the garden at the back, a glossy mahogany wardrobe, and a neatly arranged desk under a round light. Everything was perfect, yet it was strangely cold. After instructing Emily to rest, the woman left and closed the door. The girl stood in the middle of the room, listening to footsteps receding in the empty hallway. She remained motionless, watching the slivers of light streaming through the window frame. A gentle breeze made the curtains flutter, casting swaying shadows on the floor. Emily clutched the hem of her dress tightly. Why did she feel so uneasy? From the very first day in the Sterling mansion, she had sensed one thing. This place had rules that she was not allowed to break. She was forbidden from entering the basement. No one clearly explained why. Simply, it was prohibited. There was a door at the end of the hallway that was always locked, and although she had seen the servants pass by it many times, no one ever revealed even a hint of what lay behind it. But the strangest thing was not the prohibitions. It was the things that only she could hear. On the first night, when everything was swallowed by darkness, while lying in bed, Emily heard a strange sound. She opened her eyes, listening intently. It was a very faint sound, like a whisper. She sat up, her heart pounding. The whisper did not come from outside the door, nor from the corridor. It emanated from within the room itself. Emily turned her head to look around, but she saw no one. The room remained as it was, with moonlight filtering through the curtains, casting a pale glow on the rug by the bed. But the whisper persisted, as soft as a breath, as if someone were standing right behind her. She quickly turned around. There was no one. She held her breath, trying to reassure herself that perhaps she was imagining things. But then, on the second night, the third night, the phenomenon continued. Then one evening, as Emily sat by the window, she saw a figure standing outside. She startled, recoiled, and clutched the window frame tightly. It was a woman, standing silently in the dark garden, her long hair cascading over her shoulders, her face ghostly white, and her eyes deep and sorrowful. The figure did not move, nor did she blink. Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. She wanted to scream, but her throat was dry. She turned and ran toward the door, intending to call for help. But when she looked back, the figure had vanished. The girl stood there, trembling, her hands still clenched around the door frame. No one in this mansion spoke about it. No one mentioned the strange occurrences that happened at night. But Emily knew that something was not right in this place, and she also knew one thing. This place did not welcome her. William Sterling, the only son of Maxwell Sterling, had long been living a life that did not belong to himself. He grew up in a vast yet cold house, where power and mystery interwove into an invisible darkness that enveloped every corner. At the age of 18, he was a quiet, gruff young man, harboring an unnameable disgust toward his own family. In particular, he could not accept the existence of Emily, the little girl his father had brought home as a predestined fate, prearranged. From the very first moment he saw Emily step into the Sterling mansion, William knew that the girl was not a true member of this family. He saw the look of fear in her eyes as her small hands clutched the hem of her dress, as her trembling legs stepped onto the doorstep, as she tried to avoid the unfamiliar gazes all around. But what William could not tolerate more than anything was the way his father, Maxwell Sterling, looked at Emily. Not the gaze of a father toward his adopted daughter, but the look of someone who held another's fate in his hands. William knew well the rumors about his father. Since he was young, he had heard too many stories about the mysterious deaths of Maxwell's two wives. The death of Charlotte, his mother, just before her 30th birthday, then the strange death of Rebecca, the woman who had entered Maxwell's life for a brief period. And now, as Maxwell brought Emily home, everything was repeating. William did not speak to Emily in the first few days. He avoided her, or if they met, he only responded with cold indifference. In his eyes, the girl was merely a tool that Maxwell had brought home, a pawn in a game he did not want to be involved in. But the more he avoided her, the more he could not ignore what was unfolding in this house. Emily, though young, also sensed William's distance. She did not understand why he always looked at her with eyes full of hatred, nor why he always acted indifferently whenever she felt lost in this vast house. But what scared her even more was the silence of everyone in the Sterling mansion. No one truly looked at her. No one truly spoke to her, and none of them treated her like a normal child. One night, when the entire mansion was engulfed in darkness, William walked down the hallway and saw Emily standing by the window. Moonlight shone on her hair, creating a faint glow on her small face. But what made him stop was not that image, but the expression in her eyes. It was not the look of an innocent child, but the look of someone imprisoned, searching for an answer that no one wished to give her. William stood silently for a moment, then turned away. Yet inside him, there was a strange feeling, a feeling he could not name, but was certain would not vanish easily. As time passed, he began to notice Emily more. He realized that every night, the girl would often sit by the window for a long time before going to sleep. He realized that she always looked in one direction, toward the dark garden at the back of the mansion, where there was a shadow that she had once seen but no one believed her about. He realized that the girl had not smiled since she first set foot in this place. And then one day he discovered something that changed everything. William had never really cared about his father's adoption files, but once, when he accidentally passed by Maxwell's study, he saw a slightly ajar door and a set of files placed on the desk. Emily's name was printed on one, but it was not the only thing that caught his attention. He stepped in, flipping through the pages one by one, and what he found made his breath catch. Emily was not the first girl. Within the files there were many other names. The girls who had been adopted before, yet all had disappeared after a short time. There was no trace of them, no information about where they had gone, as if they had never existed. William felt as if the blood in his body had frozen. He closed the file, standing silently in the vast room. A slight breeze slipped through the window, causing the papers on the desk to flutter softly. He looked around, feeling as if the walls were closing in, as if the air was becoming more suffocating than ever. He could not let this continue. From that moment on, he knew that Emily was not merely a child adopted to have a better life. She was part of a plan that he did not fully understand, but he was certain it was far from simple. And if he did nothing, the girl would become the next victim. However, the problem was that he still did not know what he could do. He could not confront Maxwell directly. No matter how much he despised his father, he knew well the power his father wielded. Anyone who opposed him would not meet a good end. But he could not stand idly by while Emily fell into the wreckage left by the previous girls. From then on, he began to change his behavior toward her. At first, he simply observed, trying to understand the girl better. He realized that she was no longer afraid of him, as she had been initially, but still did not dare to come close. Perhaps she thought that he was just like everyone else in this house, people who always kept their distance from her. But then, little by little, he began to speak with her. One evening, when Emily was sitting on the steps looking out at the dark garden, William approached and stood beside her. He said nothing, only silently looking in the direction she was gazing. "What are you looking for?" he asked in a low voice. Emily jumped, turning to look at him, her eyes wide as if she could not believe that he was really speaking to her. Nothing," she stammered. William did not reply, merely raising his eyebrows slightly. Emily looked down at her hand, gently clutching the hem of her dress, then whispered, "There is a woman out there. I have seen her." William tilted his head slightly. "Which woman?" Emily swallowed, her small voice almost inaudible. "A woman with a very pale face and eyes that contained no darkness." William felt a chill run down his spine. He did not know whether to believe what she said, but one thing was certain. This house held too many secrets, and Emily was the only one who saw things that no one dared to mention. He knew that he could no longer pretend as if nothing was happening. He had to uncover the truth, and above all, he had to protect this girl. Because if he did nothing, the girl would never be able to leave this place. On a stormy night, when howling winds battered the windows and the pale moonlight was obscured by thick, dark clouds, Emily stealthily descended to the basement of the house she had lived in for many years. She did not know why she was so drawn to this place, but an unsettling feeling crept into her mind, urging her to explore. The basement was always off limits, and whenever she inquired about it, her adoptive parents would exchange worried glances and then change the subject. But tonight, she decided to seek the answers herself. The old wooden door creaked noisily as she gently opened it. A rush of cold air hit her face, carrying the smell of mold and something rotten. Her heart pounded within her chest, yet her feet continued down the ancient stone steps. Under the dim light of the flashlight in her hand, she scanned the room. The basement was empty, save for a few rotten wooden crates and old chairs covered in dust. But what caught her attention was a large wooden cabinet placed against the back wall of the room. Moving closer, she placed her hand on the cabinet door, her palm damp with tension. When she opened it, a series of old photographs, neatly arranged on the shelves, was revealed. She carefully picked up one photograph, dusting off the layer of grime on its glass surface. It showed a girl with a radiant smile, long flowing hair, and bright, lively eyes. But what made Emily shudder was the small inscription in the corner of the photo. Sarah, 17 years old. She set the photograph down and picked up another. Maggie, 17 years old. The more she flipped through, the more she saw different faces. Yet the common factor was that all of them were 17 years old. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she realized the abnormality. All these girls looked like her, and all had vanished before their 18th birthdays. Her heart pounded faster, her hands trembling as she continued to search. At the bottom of the cabinet, there was a small wooden box, carefully locked. Emily hastily searched for something to pick the lock. After a few minutes of fumbling, she found an old key lying between the wooden slats on the shelf. When the lock clicked open, she almost held her breath as she saw what lay inside, a white dress stained with blood. Emily stepped back, covering her mouth with both hands to stifle a scream. She picked up the dress, the cold, damp fabric making her shudder. It was not an old stain, but fresh blood stains, as if someone had tried to wash it clean, but had failed to remove them entirely. She put the dress down, her eyes scanning the basement, and suddenly noticed a small engraving on the old brick wall behind the cabinet. Moving closer, she shone her flashlight upon it. The crooked words, deeply carved into the wall, read, "We cannot escape. Run while you still can." She stepped back, her mind reeling. The girls in the photos, the blood-stained dress, and this desperate inscription could only be explained one way. This was not merely a house. This was a trap, a prison. Emily felt as if her legs were frozen to the ground. A voice whispered in her mind, ordering her to run immediately. Yet another part of her wanted to understand more about this horrifying truth. Who had written that inscription? Who was the owner of the blood-stained dress? And most importantly, what would happen to her on her 18th birthday? Unusual sounds echoed from above the stairs. Emily startled and turned around. Someone was coming. She quickly closed the cabinet, switched off her flashlight, and retreated into the darkness. Her breathing became rapid, her heart pounding as if it wanted to burst from her chest. The basement door slowly creaked open, heavy footsteps resonating in the cold space. A shadowy figure appeared on the stairs, the hallway light casting a terrifying silhouette on the cold stone. Emily held her breath, trying not to make any noise. The figure stepped down a few steps, paused, then muttered something indistinctly. "I know someone is here." Emily closed her eyes tightly, praying that the darkness would conceal her. She could hear the stranger's steady breathing and feel that ominous presence just a few meters away. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps echoed again, and the figure turned back, closing the basement door. Emily waited a few more minutes until all was silent. She knew she could not stay here any longer. She had to leave this house immediately and ensure that no one leaves here until I decide otherwise. Lucas nodded, pulling out his phone to transmit the orders. Instantly, the entire locking system in the mansion was activated. Windows, the main door, secret passages, all were sealed shut. Unaware of this, Emily and William silently approached the library window, only to discover that it had been locked from the inside. A sense of despair washed over Emily's face. William pounded the wall forcefully, his voice laced with indignation. He knew, "We've been trapped." Emily looked around, desperately searching for another escape route. A flash of lightning split the sky, illuminating the room for a moment to reveal a small passage above the ceiling, a ventilation duct. She turned to William, her eyes lighting up with hope. "We can try that way. It leads to the roof." With no other options, William quickly helped Emily climb up, then followed suit. But just as they reached the roof, a low voice sounded from behind. "Do you really think you can leave here so easily, Maxwell?" The wind howled on the roof, and the rain lashed against Emily and William like cold, merciless whips. Maxwell stood just below, on the balcony, his eyes burning with rage. In his hand, he held a gun. "Step down immediately, or I swear I won't hesitate," Maxwell roared, his voice blending with the rumble of thunder. Emily shook her head, tears mingling with the rain. "You can't hold me forever. I am not your prisoner." Maxwell gripped the gun tighter, his hand trembling, not from the cold, but from anger. He knew that he was nearing his 50th birthday, and his control was gradually slipping. He had lost too much in his life, and Emily was the only one he could hold on to. William squeezed Emily's hand. "We jump." Emily turned to him, horrified. "No, we'll die if we jump from this height." But William did not hesitate. He knew that if they did not act immediately, they would never get a second chance. In one swift motion, he pulled Emily into his arms, and then they leapt. The world seemed to sway. The wind roared in their ears as they plunged through the air. In that brief moment, everything appeared to slow down. Maxwell's furious face, the raging rain, and the bone-chilling cold. They landed on a rain-soaked grassy field. Pain tore through them, but there was no time to check their injuries. They scrambled to their feet and ran toward the gate. Maxwell bellowed, "Catch them!" Guards emerged, chasing them through the downpour. But Emily and William had the advantage. They dashed across the garden, sprinting toward the narrow path leading out. In the distance, the headlights of a vehicle glimmered, a car waiting for them. Lucas stood by the car, the door already open. "Get in, quickly!" Without hesitation, Emily and William leapt inside. The engine roared to life, the wheels skidding on the wet ground as the car sped away. Maxwell stood on the balcony, watching them flee. The rain continued to pour, blurring the solitary figure of the man. He clenched his fists, his eyes filled with fury and something else, fear. He was losing control, and that was something he would never allow. The car raced into the dark night, leaving behind the storm that rumbled on. Emily looked out the window, her heart still pounding fiercely. She turned to William, her hand reaching out for his. "We did it, but Maxwell won't stop." William nodded, his eyes revealing his deep concern. "We have only just begun. This chase is far from over." And they knew the darkness was still lurking behind them. Maxwell Sterling's 50th birthday party was held at an opulent mansion atop a hill, from whose balcony one could see the entire city stretching out beneath a tapestry of twinkling lights. It was a grand event, one that few were privileged enough to attend. Politicians, successful businessmen, and renowned artists, all gathered under a gigantic dome adorned with dazzling crystal chandeliers. Long evening gowns swept the floor, meticulously tailored tuxedos, and crystal glasses of champagne that shimmered softly in the gentle light. Maxwell, the powerful man, stood amid the crowd with a refined appearance. He had it all: wealth, fame, and a glittering career. But there was one thing that few knew about Maxwell, and tonight that truth would be exposed. Emily, a woman with steadfast and sharp eyes, stood silently among the crowd. She wore a simple black dress, unadorned yet exuding strength. In her hand was a glass, her fingers gripping it just a little too tightly. She had been waiting for this moment for a long time. Suddenly, William, a young man with brown hair and eyes filled with anger, stepped onto the stage. No one knew who he was. The crowd buzzed with murmurs. The servers quietly moved about, refilling glasses for the increasingly bewildered guests. But then, the atmosphere began to darken as William took hold of the microphone. Maxwell narrowed his eyes. His lips twitched slightly as if to protest, but it was too late. "This man does not adopt children. He is merely seeking a sacrificial offering." The room fell into silence. For a second, 2 seconds, and then suddenly, whispers began to spread. The guests exchanged glances, their confusion evident. Some laughed, thinking it was merely a joke. But the expression on William's face held no trace of humor. Emily set her glass down on the table, her eyes locked onto Maxwell's. "William, what are you saying?" a guest in a black tuxedo near the stage demanded, his voice laced with skepticism. William took a deep breath, his hand gripping the microphone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "I'm not joking." His voice dropped, carrying a weight that made the entire room feel suffocating. Maxwell Sterling is not the philanthropist he claims to be. The children he adopts, they never get the chance to grow up. Many laughed, but as William continued, each word like a knife thrust into the air, all the laughter slowly died away. They vanish. Not a trace remains. No one ever finds them after Maxwell brings them home. Has anyone ever wondered why? Maxwell stepped forward, his voice calm yet exuding authority. "Who are you? Where did you get these slanderous words?" William looked directly into his eyes. "I am one of those children, but I escaped." The room exploded in shock. Some guests set their glasses down, their eyes filled with worry. Others whispered among themselves, uncertain whether to believe what they were hearing. Maxwell laughed, a laugh filled with scorn. "Escaped? Do you know what you're saying? I have devoted my life to helping children. Hundreds of children have a better life because of me." William ground his teeth. "No, you do not save them. You select them, like one choosing a dish from a menu." All eyes turned to Maxwell. Emily stood up, stepping forward to face Maxwell, halting the authoritative gaze of his. "Do you think I'm a talisman? Wrong. You are the one who decides your own fate." Those words struck Maxwell like a dagger to the chest. Memories suddenly flooded his mind. Innocent faces, terrified eyes, tiny hands reaching out for help. He had always believed himself invincible, that no one would ever be strong enough to overthrow him. But now, right before him, was the most naked truth. The crowd began to stir, admiration turning into suspicion, and then into fear. "Maxwell, is this for real?" a woman in a red dress near the stage asked, her voice trembling. Maxwell stepped back. No, this could not be happening. He had been careful, had hidden every trace. But now, the whole world was watching him, waiting for an answer. Cold sweat streamed down his forehead. Maxwell swallowed hard. This is a misunderstanding, but no one believed him anymore. Emily stared straight at him, her eyes containing nothing but contempt. "You can't run away forever, Maxwell." In that moment, Maxwell Sterling collapsed. There was no more laughter, no more admiring glances. Only one stark truth remained. A man once revered was now exposed as nothing more than a deceiver, unmasked amid the dazzling lights. Guests hurriedly departed the party. The murmurs grew louder. Maxwell wanted to shout, to deny, but no one listened anymore. William released the microphone. Emily turned and walked away, and behind them, amid what had once been a lavish party now in ruins, Maxwell Sterling stood there, a solitary figure in the very kingdom he had built. Maxwell stood frozen in the middle of the grand hall, where hundreds of eyes were fixed upon him. For years, he had lived in his own delusion, surrounded by power, fame, and the false belief that he could control everything according to his will. But now, as he saw William kneeling beside Emily, his eyes filled with tears, he realized just how lost he had become. The accusations no longer came from anyone else, but from his own heart. He saw himself in the image of a lonely man, imprisoned by his own decisions, lost in the prejudices that had been deeply ingrained in his mind for decades. All the harm, all the pain he had caused to Emily and William could no longer be denied. Maxwell knelt down, an act he had never done before anyone, but now, before the astonished gazes of everyone, he did it. Before Emily, the woman who had endured so much suffering because of him. Before William, the child he had once rejected, once neglected, once seen as a mistake from the past. But above all, he was kneeling before his own conscience. "I was wrong." His voice trembled. For the first time in his life, Maxwell felt his throat tighten, not with anger or pride, but with regret rising like an uncontrollable wave. "Emily," he looked at the woman before him, his eyes full of sorrow. "I was not brave enough to protect you. I allowed my arrogance to hurt you for so many years. I took so many things that should have been yours." Emily looked at him, tears streaming down her face. She had longed for these words from him for years, but never thought they would truly be spoken. Her heart was bitter, a mix of pain and relief. She could not immediately forgive him, but at least, for the first time, she saw the true man behind Maxwell, no longer the mask of power and pride. Maxwell turned to William, the grandson he had once seen as a disgrace. The child who carried his blood, but also the child he had abandoned. Today, when he looked into William's eyes, he no longer saw the image of an enemy of the family, but a strong, resilient young man, and more importantly, the grandson he had lost all these years. "William, I cannot ask for your forgiveness right now, but if you give me a chance to make things right, I am ready to give up everything." William looked at Maxwell, his heart torn between hatred and compassion. He had long wished for this day to come, but when it actually happened, he didn't know whether he could let go of the pain from the past. But looking at the frail old man before him, once a symbol of cruelty and indifference now kneeling before him, he realized that perhaps he too needed to be freed. "I don't know if I can forgive you," William said, his voice filled with emotion, "but I believe everyone deserves a chance to change." Maxwell nodded, tears rolling down his face, etched with the marks of time. He didn't expect immediate forgiveness. He only knew that he had to do everything to make amends, even if it took years. Then, before everyone's eyes, Maxwell walked over to the large portrait of his ancestors. He gazed at the stern faces of those who had once set the harsh rules he had blindly followed. But today, he was no longer bound by those old laws. He raised his hand, yanked the portrait down, letting it crash to the floor with a loud sound. "Today," Maxwell said, his voice stronger than ever, "this family will no longer be bound by outdated ideas. We will no longer distinguish between bloodlines or backgrounds. We will no longer let the past dictate the future." The entire hall fell silent. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. The man who had once been the symbol of conservatism and cruelty was now the one who stood up to break the very rules he had once defended. Emily and William looked at each other, their eyes filled with emotion. They knew the road ahead was still long. The wounds wouldn't heal immediately, but this was the first step, the most important step. Maxwell knelt again, this time not to beg for forgiveness, but to acknowledge his true self. He had once been a man of mistakes, but he would no longer let those mistakes define who he was. And then, in the faint light of the evening, a new chapter began. Not just for Maxwell, but for this entire family. Years later, time, like a quiet river, carried away the pains, but left marks that could never be erased on the souls of those who had walked through the harshest trials of life. Emily, William, and Maxwell, three people with three fates once intertwined in a tragic tale, now grown, each choosing their own path, but none of them were still bound by fate. Emily was no longer the small girl who once trembled in the darkness of oppression and fear. After reclaiming her freedom, she had continuously risen, honing herself like a sword that had once been dulled but now sharpened. The dreams that had been stripped away, she rebuilt piece by piece, but more importantly, she found a love that was not bound by coercion or calculation. A pure love, born from respect and sacrifice. William, who had once silently stood behind her, remained her unwavering support. He did not rush forward with empty promises, but instead silently walked beside her, witnessing her growth, and in doing so, their love blossomed like a sturdy sapling standing firm in the storm. They had endured difficult times together, not because fate had arranged it, but because they had chosen to be together. But the story didn't stop at love. Maxwell, the man who had once embodied ruthless power, had also changed. He had seen his past reflected in the fearful eyes of the children forced into early marriages, children who had never had the chance to speak. He realized that redemption was not simply asking for forgiveness, but through action. Therefore, Maxwell dedicated the rest of his life to establishing a charity, bringing freedom to children like Emily from the past. His charity not only helped hundreds of girls secure a future, but also awakened the consciousness of an entire society. He not only redeemed himself, but changed a system that had once hindered the freedom of the vulnerable. It was not just atonement, it was his way of finding himself again, reclaiming a part of humanity that had been lost. The day Emily and William officially entered the wedding hall, not as people bound by fate, but as two souls freely choosing to be together, Maxwell stood off to the side, silently watching. He did not expect forgiveness, but the look in Emily's eyes that day contained something he had never seen: peace. It was not forgetting, but liberation. For the first time in his life, he understood that people could change, and sometimes, love and compassion could erase even the deepest wounds. The story ended not with an ending, but with a new beginning. Emily smiled, no longer the girl of yesterday, no longer a victim of fate, but the one who mastered her own life. For the first time, she was truly free. No one is bound by fate. We decide our own lives. Love, compassion, and forgiveness can change people. Thank you for following this story. If you found it meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to continue accompanying more inspiring stories ahead.